If you have ever made a Vtuber model before, you know that they can take hours upon hours to make. Not just the rigging, but the art as well. Model art can take a very long time, from days to months, depending on the style, detail, and how often you work on it. Rushing this process is not recommended, but I had the fantastic idea of what if I imposed a very strict deadline upon myself to draw a VTuber model. Would I be able to make something I am happy with, and would I be able to complete a model at all? Well, let's find out. I'm Sleepy Sunrise, and today I'm exploring creating VTuber model art within 2 different time limits, 1 day and 1 week. This experiment all began because I am a really slow artist. I barely finish anything in one session, and I wanted to see if it was possible for me to get some complete model art done in these short time periods. So I set myself some guidelines about how the timing would work, because one day could be 24 hours of working time to some people, but I decided to go with just a real life day, which includes the time I sleep, do other things, eat, because it would be more realistic to my process. Because honestly, I would not spend 24 hours a day on one piece of art. I would give up, my brain would give up, my body would give up, and I don't know in what order. So when I started this, I wasn't even sure if I would be able to complete either of the models. During this video, I will kind of go through my process of drawing a model and how I felt while doing it. Then at the end of the video, I'm going to break down how much time I actually spent working on each model and what I accomplished to compare the two of them. Before I get started, I just want to say, try not to give an artist such a tight timeline like this if you can help it. Some people might be open to it, but I think it can just really limit what can be done and add unnecessary stress, because I was stressed out and I did this to myself. Now, for a fair comparison, I decided it would be best to do the same design over both models, because I wouldn't have to design 2 different models and I could directly compare the differences. I also wondered if I should do both designs in my regular art style like this model, but I quickly realized I would not be able to draw much in one day if I did it like that, so I decided to do the 1 day model in my chibi art style and the regular style for the 1 week model. The 1 day model was up first, but I still need a design. So I had to come up with a design using some of my day, just eaten into that 1 day time period. And I decided I wanted to do a design based on a camellia flower for no particular reason. I was just thinking about them a lot around the time that I was doing this, and having a theme just makes it easier because you can design around a motif. And I made a camisole type dress to represent the petals of the flowers, and then some bloomers underneath just to represent the stamens. A lot of the design is symmetrical, so I added some ribbons for a little bit of asymmetry just to make it a little bit more interesting. And after the sketch, I did a little concept art just to flesh out the details and to use for reference when I drew the actual models, and so I knew what colors to use. I spent around 4 hours on this character, and thinking back, I probably could have spent less time and maybe not included it in my 1 day model time, but this is just how I went about it because the design of the model should be included, I think. Finally, I started on the sketch of the actual model. I had to spend quite a bit of time figuring out the proportions because I don't actually draw a lot of full body chibis, and I don't think my style translates that well into the really small body type chibis. So I had to figure out what proportions would look best in my style. And with line art, I tend to start with the head and hair. Hair is probably my favorite thing to draw. And when I do my line art, I tend to already separate the parts because my brain just doesn't do well with cutting later. And I wish I did, because I feel like my method is so inefficient, but it's just what works for me. I don't know how to cut. I wish I did. I'm just not good at it. And I paused my recording to take a break and I forgot to unpause it, so I changed the petals of the dress during that time. They're a different shape now, and it's just because the original petal shape looked more rose-like than camellia, so I just rounded them a bit more. After line art, I always tend to do base layers for each part, which I then clip my coloring to. You will see this in my 1 week model as well. I just find it better for me because I don't have to be as careful when coloring. Then I lay down all my base colors. I check them with a grayscale filter to make sure my colors aren't too flat. I always want my colors to pop, so it's just good to check them in grayscale to make sure there are enough levels between all the different colors. And then I just went through and colored and shaded everything. Because of the time limit, I just kept things simple with cell shading. I just didn't question my decisions once again. I forgot to unpause when I did the eyes because my brain is mush at this point. And my favorite and simultaneously least favorite thing to color was the dress. It was my favorite because I really liked how it came out, and my least favorite since I decided to make each petal its own separate layer. And I did that because when I was thinking about rigging, I thought it would flow really well if they were all separate, and I just wanted to make things harder for myself with the drawing part with my already short time period, but I got it done. And then the only thing left was to merge my layers, then separate the right and left halves. I decided not to cut the legs or the arms into pieces for this model because no thank you. I do not have the time. I do not have the brain cells for that at this point. It's like 9 hours in, and so this is the final result. I am honestly surprised I finished it, but I did, and this is what I was able to achieve in a realistic day. I will talk more about how I think it went at the end of the video, but I will say that I do think she is quite cute. And next up is the 1 week model. I'm not gonna lie, this was really daunting to me, not in the sense of making the model, but more wondering about if I would be able to motivate myself to work on this every day for a week. Because if I skip a day, that day still counts. It's still part of the week, and yeah, if I skip a day, I'm just losing a full day that I could be working on this. So, my plan for day 1 was simple. I was just going to complete a detailed sketch and figure out how to elevate the clothing a little. I'm not a fast drawer, as I've said before, and I didn't want to overshoot what I thought I could do in a day. I'm also not the best at complex, detailed clothing, so I really wanted to flesh out that on like day 1 in the sketch. I didn't want my 1 week model to be exactly the same as the day one, just in a different style. I wanted it to have more thought put into it since I had a lot more time to work on it, and I wasn't gonna waste my time on hands, so I just used a 3D model on Clip Studio to get the shape. I sketched all the layers and adjusted placements of things like the face if I thought they looked funny. And when I was drawing this, I planned to do a rigging video with these models with the same concept, so I was keeping in mind what I thought I could rig in 1 week. I might still do that video, it's just that I have a lot less free time than before because I started working full time since then, and I need to figure out a way to do it because I realistically have 3 to 4 hours a day free. And I do really want to rig these models, so I'm going to figure something out. Anyway, I usually opt for more simplistic designs and details, but I wanted something a bit more intricate with this model because I just thought it would look cute, and I wanted to be consistent across the model, like scallop edges, ruffles and bows. And after I finished all the base sketches, I decided to sketch some possible toggles too. I did not opt for an outfit or a hair toggle because it would take longer to do. Instead, I just decided on some expression and activity toggles before realizing I forgot the inside of the mouth, and so I had to sketch that, and then that's where I ended day 1, just having a complete sketch like I planned out. Good job me. And thus day 2 began. I started this day with a plan once again, and that was to get all of my line art done. Once again, my process is line art, colors, and then renders. I figured that if I finished my line art today, I would have 5 days to color, render, and cut. So usually I separate everything when I draw the line art, but I decided for big parts I would do it as one piece then cut it later. I thought it would be more time efficient for this project. As always, starting at the head feels right, and I quickly realized my pen nib was dull, so I had to change it. The feeling of it being dull was just clawing at my soul, and even though it was just the slightest difference, it really bothered me. But I'm also the type of person that when I worked at a restaurant, we changed receipt paper once, and it really threw me off because it felt like slightly different and it really bothered me, so the same happened here. While doing the hair, it really hit me that I had to think more about the small details and how they looked then on the one-day model, because now that I had time and I wasn't rushing, I actually had to think and question like if things looked correct. I drew actual feet this time. I don't know why, I don't know what I was thinking, and I don't know how I feel about them. And I think it was because just in case I wanted to do a different outfit later or something and I need feet, I don't think I would, but yeah. And I don't know why I always forget, but line art takes longer than sketching because line art actually has to make sense of the mess that is the sketch. Although even then I didn't get as much done as I expected because I had to take an unexpected break trying to sort out something with a 3D print I was doing for a cosplay, so I had to end my day 2 here, and I didn't get to do the line art for the dress, bloomer's mouth, flower, and toggles, so about half the model, so goodbye for my planned day 2. Day 3, I was determined. It was my most motivated day because if I didn't get a significant amount done, there was a really low chance that this model would be finished by the end of the week. I told myself I was going to finish all the line art and start coloring. This day was also a battle against my focus because the amount of long-form Minecraft videos I was watching while making this made me just want to stop and play Minecraft, and that was really testing. While most of the model I did with symmetry, things like the ruffles I didn't do symmetrically, and I was also starting to realize how many different movable parts there would be, and I started questioning my decisions. I also had to start sorting my layers at this point because otherwise this file would be absolute chaos. The ruffles, I cannot stress how much the ruffles wrecked my mental on this day. I spent so long on them. Then I used a bunch of ruffle brushes just to see how I wanted to draw my ruffles. Why did I decide to do 6 layers of ruffles? Are the ruffles really worth it? Is this what makes me give up on this model? Those were the questions I had while doing this, and then I quickly forgot all of those because I realized that drawing the dress was way worse because each petal I had to draw separately, and I'm also not the best at drawing organic objects, so I don't know why I did a flower-based design. I finished off the line art today by drawing the toggles, by just copying the arms I already had, just reworking them because why draw it again when I have a time limit? And that is where I ended the day. I didn't draw the tablet because I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do with it at this point. And then we get to day 4. Day 4. The halfway point of this experiment, and I just start the coloring process. As we saw in the one-day model, I always start with the basic shapes because it helps me make sure that all my line art and layers are in the correct spots. At this point, I did some cutting, but the rest I left for later. And on this day, I had the thought of why did I do hands and gloves when I could have just done gloves, but I think I did them separately for the same reason I drew feet, which would that it would be easier to make changes later if I have the whole body to work off of. The first thing I like to render is always the eyes. This is always such a trust the process moment for me because midway through it looks so bad. But for me, eyes are one of the most important parts of the model, and they're such a distinct part of an artist's style because like everyone draws eyes like differently, I think. After rendering the eyes, I immediately took a break from rendering and just put down base colors for everything to do the rendering later. One change I made was the hair color. The character's hair is white, but in the one-day model I thought it was kind of flat and I don't know how to shade white more interestingly, so I changed it to a pale yellow. And I then went through all of my lace brushes to find one to use for the bolero and socks and overlaid it on a white that I lowered the opacity of. Today I also decided to cut the hair into pieces because it made sense to me to cut it before rendering it, and I ended the day by rendering small areas like the jewel and the lips. Day 5. 3 days left to complete this model, and this is when I got into the real brunt of rendering, and I will always say this, but I'm not great at rendering and I didn't have a plan going into this. I just started where I thought I would do best, and I decided to start with the dress because I was just gonna render it the same way I did with the one-day model. I did this by starting at the top and shading the chest and the gold, and then I worked on the petals starting from the bottom petals and coloring them each individually, shading first, then a bright red with an airbrush to make it pop, and then the highlights. I added the highlights the same way that I like to highlight hair, which is drawing lines in my highlight color and then using the fingertip smudge tool, and I just think that it makes things look so shiny. I did this process for each petal of the dress. I really felt the time difference when doing this on the 1 week model compared to the 1 day model because this dress was something I spent the most time on both models, and when shading this dress for the 1 week model it took me around 3 hours, which is pretty much a third of the time I spent on the 1 day model. I then shaded the flower on the head in the same way and the headband. Something I want to mention that during this process I was determined to shade using colors rather than a multiply layer, just because I feel like sometimes I'm a little bit too dependent on multiply layers, so I just wanted to learn a bit more about shading using like colors. And then I decided to shade the hair next because this is usually my favorite thing to shade, and I struggled. I couldn't shade this pale yellow in a way that I liked. It just felt like I was either making it too dirty or too blonde, so I eventually just went back to the white, but I was determined not to shade with grey. So I looked up how to shade white and I found a reference, and then I used a similar type of palette for shading, which I tweaked to match this model more. So to shade this hair I used a darker purple, a light purple, and pastel blue, and a pastel yellow. And then I toned the opacity down so it was more subtle, and I actually really liked how this shading turned out, and I changed the line art to a grey so it wasn't as harsh against the white. Day 6 and right into it. Rendering once again, doing the bloomers. I'm not going to speak much of my process for the rest of the rendering because it's kind of just the same. I rendered the bloomers, the ribbons, shoes, everything else. And as I went through rendering each part, I also changed the line art to a dark reddish brown. I always start with black, but it's never what I finish with. And I shaded all the whites with the same colors as the hair, and I also began coloring the activity toggles. It was at this moment that I remembered that the inside of the mouth exists, and I completely forgot about it, so I quickly did the coloring and the shading for the mouthpieces. This made me think that with such a tight timeline, it would be so easy to forget something and then just not do it. Another reason that I think a deadline is a really bad idea. Also, whenever I see the way I draw the mouth outside the face, it's kind of a nightmare fuel because it's a little bit more in a realistic style. It just kind of reminds me of when I used to redraw my anatomy diagrams from my textbooks. And with the rest of my time in this day, I worked on the expression toggles like the tears, which I needed to reference my model for because I forgot how to make them look the way I wanted. I really struggle working without reference sometimes because I can't picture things. So when I draw it and it doesn't turn out how my brain thinks it will, I don't know what to do. Thinking on words sometimes really doesn't translate visually, but sometimes my words translate well visually and it's a confusing existence. You know, I used to think that people were lying when they said that they could picture things, like when the teacher said, close your eyes and picture a house. I was like, okay, everyone's doing what I'm doing, which is just explaining to myself in words what makes up a house. And I didn't know until I was an adult that people actually can visualize images in their head. Anyway, I'm rambling. I just finished the face toggles on this day, and now on to the final day, and will I get this completed? So day 7, and this was my last day, and I had to do something that I was putting off as much as I could, which was shading the body. I am so bad at rendering skin, and we're not going to talk about it. You can just watch the mess that is me attempting this. I also finally had to draw the tablet for the drawing toggle, and I didn't have a good idea for it, and I'm just going to say that I hate it. This is one of the things I'm most unhappy with, and I really wish I had more time to work on it, but I just had to go with it because this is the final day. I don't have the time to think of a good idea, make something really nice. So now that everything was rendered, I had to do all the cutting and some line art stuff. So for the parts that would be moving the most, I wanted to try the color fill line art technique, which is where instead of line art you have a color filled layer underneath and it outlines the piece, and then this layer stays separate from the rendered layer, and it means that when moving the line art won't cut into other pieces and will connect a bit more cleanly with other pieces. I did not do it on all of the pieces because I just didn't have the time to do it like that. And then I just finished my day by cutting, making these line art layers, and merging my layers together, then separating my left and right layers. And with that, my 1 week model art was complete, and I was shocked that I finished it at all. And this is the final result. So these are the two models side by side, and I'm just going to give you some quantitative numbers and give my final thoughts on this experiment. I am pretty proud that I finished these, but am I happy with how I did? In a way, yes. I'm proud that I got something finished within both of the time frames, and I do think they turned out quite well, but there are many things that I just think I could have done better if I didn't have such a strict time limit. I'm going to compare these by how long I actually spent working on each one, the number of layers I ended up with, and how many toggles that I drew. For the 1 day model, I had a total working time of 9 hours and 33 minutes, and for the 1 week model, I had a total working time of 39 hours and 12 minutes. So this meant that I spent less time working on the 1 week model per day than the 1 day model because it averages to about 5.6 hours per day, although it was not even like this, and I had the flexibility to work more on some days and less on others. For the 1 day model, I ended with 141 layers, which is honestly more than I expected. This is all because of those freaking petals. And for the 1 week model, I ended with 379 layers, although 24 are those color fill line art layers, so it's more like 355 layers. And for the toggles, the 1 day had none unless you count the blush, which could be its own toggle. and that would mean it has 1 toggle, and for the 1 week model it has 6 toggles. Now it's obvious that I got a lot more done in 1 week than 1 day, and I do like the 1 week model more. More time just gave me more freedom to add detail and experiment and take time making it look good. And when I look at the 1 day one next to the 1 week model, it falls kind of flat for me and it's just not as vibrant, but the 1 week is still not a reasonable time frame. I don't think it's still too short. While I got this done and I'm happy, there are so many things like the slippers, the tablet, the toggles, and I just feel like I could have done better, which if I had more time, I think I would have done more, added more detail, done things differently. Even just like the lack of jewelry, small details like that show how pressed I was for time. I really think either having no time limit or just a more generous amount of time will allow for more creativity and a better output for a VTuber model art. For reference, I'm just going to give you some numbers for the model that I'm currently using. I did not have a time limit when I drew this, and I don't know how many hours I worked on it, but it was definitely more than on the 1 week model. And this model has 400 layers and 18 toggles, and I just think that there's a lot more like small details that add to my character's personality and style, and these small things just give some more uniqueness to the design. And they only exist because I had the time to plan and design this character and add things throughout the process. So it is possible to create VTuber model art within a strict time frame, but the more time you allow gives more freedom and creativity when drawing your character, and it is less stressful. Although I do believe that setting a timeline can be a good thing for productivity if you're like me, because I actually got these done because I was under the crunch. I had a deadline, so I knew that I had to work on them. Therefore, in conclusion, there are benefits to a timeline along with drawbacks, but if you could balance them correctly, it could give you enough time to allow for creativity and freedom, but also increasing your productivity. Well, this video was really long and longer than I thought, and if you put up with my rambling this far, thank you. I'm really going to try to get this rigging video done at some point, but considering it's been over a month since I recorded the footage for this one, I'm not sure how soon I will be able to find time. I also don't know what I will do with these models once I rig them, because I don't need to use them, I have my own, but we'll see. And maybe I'll do something different next, not the rigging video that I don't need like full days for, but we'll see. Thank you once again if you watched this far. I'll see you later, and make sure that you get some sleep.